Hello everyone, I welcome you to our first video. So in the first video I would like to discuss with you and analyze one of the main Catalan variations, and it's going to be the fourth move, d takes c4. So this move is very concrete, I would say. I have a lot of experience playing this as black as well, and essentially the main point is to immediately capture that pawn and try to apply some standard plans as black, right? And create this pressure basically in the center. Okay, so let's get it started with. So we start with d4. Of course, you can get Catalan as well after playing knight f3, but let's just play the most solid moves. So pawn to d4, black responds with d5, pawn to c4, e6, knight to f3, knight f6, and we play g3 here, developing our light square bishop on g2. Okay, so the first line for us is going to be d takes c4. Yeah, so actually white has a few moves candidates. Bishop g2 would be my recommendation, and in my opinion, the best move, without a question. There is also queen a4, just directly trying to get the pawn back. But, the disadvantage is that after the queen would be developed that early to c4, white gets into those a6, b5 ideas. And, white is essentially losing a lot of time, which, which is definitely not the best in terms of, fighting for the advantage. Okay, so bishop g2. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to worry about sacrificing this pawn on c4 for now. Of course, there are lots of variations where you have to. Yeah, but in this case, yeah, nothing really big happens with this pawn. So I think let's start with the move knight bd7. Very interesting choice. I mean, that's quite a good square for the knight. So why not? White castles, short side, and here black has some moves candidates. The main one is c6. There's also c5, immediately targeting white's strong center, and rook b8, with an idea to avoid this escape from the light square bishop and play b5 and protect the extra pawn. Okay, so let's start with the move c5. If black plays c5, there's a very interesting idea, knight a3, which is used in Catalan System quite often. So, instead of taking the pawn back with the queen by playing queen a4, queen c4, you want to develop your minor pieces, right? To avoid potential tempos from black. And, this knight on c4 apparently could be super useful, especially, if it gets to e5 or even to d6, yeah? So here knight b6, and yeah, very nice idea we have is sacrificing the knight to c4. You should definitely remember that. It looks like we've lost the knight, but of course not, because after knight c4, we have a nice double threat with the queen. After queen to a4, check. Yeah, black covers the check. We recapture the knight. For example, pawn to b5, trying to get aggressive, and queen c3. Yeah, you don't need to necessarily go with the queen back to c2. There is a nice move, queen c3, knight d5, and then queen d2. Yeah, so of course, black has to somehow deal with this pressure in the center. But, the problem is that if, for example, black ignores this pressure, right, and plays like bishop e7, we could simply capture on c5. Black would have to recapture, and then just knight e5. Yeah, and black lost a lot of time, and white gets a bishop spare, which is mostly in Catalan the main goal. Yeah, I mean, white is completely satisfied if white gets a bishop spare. Just remember that. I mean, there are just some endgames where, you have a bishop against the knight and you're completely fine. Yeah, just a little advantage means that you're doing good. Okay, so let's go back. It means that instead of bishop e7, the best move for black is to advance the c-file pawn forward, c4, just to avoid white from taking on c5. But the disadvantage of this move is that white is able to fully control the center. Yeah, with, for example, knight e5. And white basically gets an initiative, a bishop's pair, and this d4 pawn is incredibly strong. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. So it was this c5 move right after short castle, and now let's take a look at the move rook b8. So if black plays rook b8, the idea is essentially very obvious. Black wants to play b5 and just get an extra pawn. Why not? So for that reason, we should definitely respond with a4. Yeah, and yeah, of course we want to prevent black from playing b5. So that's why a4, a6, and now another very standard and common idea in Catalan system is to advance your a-file pawn to a5. Yeah. So by playing this, the goal is actually to make en passant after b5, and yeah, it gets quite challenging for black. So bishop d6 makes sense. Why not? Just developing the minor piece, preparing short castle, knight b2. We want to take the pawn back, pawn to b5, a takes b5, knight b6, knight e5. Black has some vulnerable spots on the queen side, like the c6 square. So black has to take, essentially. Pawn takes, knight fd5, and of course our usual idea, knight c4. And basically after knight c4, queen a4, white has a bishop's pair, and this knight on d5, the problem with this knight is that it's not an outpost. Yeah, which basically means that the square where knight could be placed for a longer period of time. But unfortunately for black in this case, white always has this e4 idea, yeah, to get the knight away. Okay, so here, yeah, white simply has an advantage. Let's go back a little. Okay, so instead of rook b8, the main move would be c6. And if white responds incorrectly, for example, just knight c3, yeah, usual developing move, the problem is that black has b5. And after b5, it would be very challenging for white to win the pawn back. So that's why a4. Here black could try either b6 or a5. If black plays b6, there's a very strong move, knight fd2. Yeah, so that's actually a double threat, because the pawn on c6 hangs by our light square bishop, and pawn on c4 is threatened by the knight. Bishop to a6, very reasonable. Bishop takes on c6, the rook is hanging, so rook c8 makes complete sense. Of course, we should get the bishop a bit back, and this bishop b5 idea is quite nice because if black trades up the bishops, then the white's rook gets activated, and white just has a huge advantage. So for that reason, essentially the only move black has is bishop to b7, knight to c3, pawn to h5. Pawn on c4 is essentially lost, so at least black should try to create a counterplay on the king side, yeah, by opening up the h-file, and maybe try to turn on some checkmate patterns. So pawn to e4, we don't have to rush. Pawn to h4, queen e2. Especially if your opponent hasn't castled yet, you should try to just play solid, and you don't necessarily need to rush. Yeah, so just queen e2. But yeah, for example, if hg, you don't need to help your opponent and play hg, you can simply play fg, and simultaneously open up your f-file rook, and white is just doing completely fine. Yeah, for instance, bishop e4, you could just play e5. Yeah, why not? Knight d5, knight d4. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, even though materially white is not winning, Yeah, but you know, if you take a look at the position more deeply, you can definitely see that black's king side is extremely vulnerable. Like for instance, the g7 pawn is in a big danger after queen g4 move, right? And yeah, basically the h file open as well, and for black it would be too dangerous to castle short side. So that's why white has a big initiative here. So let's go back a little. It was this move b6. So after b6, just remember that you have this nice idea, knight fd2. So sometimes it's knight e5, but you know, in this case, unfortunately, it doesn't work because black would simply take, and yeah, we don't need that. Okay, so the main move is pawn to a5 here, queen c2. We want to simply get the pawn back. There's either b5 or knight b6. If knight b6, you can play e4 with an idea to restrict black's knights, right? You don't want to transfer the black knight to b4. So yeah, we just play e4 to control the d5 square. Bishop to b4, rook d1. Yeah, I mean, there is no need to rush. I would say that knight in b6 is a little bit misplaced. And yeah, I mean, black's pieces are quite, you know, pretty blocked, I would say. And, you know, like the main problem for them is to get the c8 bishop into the game. So for instance, castling looks very logical. Knight a3. I guess black has to take at some point. If they don't, then just knight c4 and yeah, we're completely fine. Or you could actually start with knight e5 first. Yeah, because you don't want to lose the e4 pawn. Yeah, because if knight c4, knight takes, queen takes, then actually your pawn on e4 is hanging, right? So you have to play knight e5 first, and then you can nicely recapture the pawn. So if bishop takes, you can simply recapture with the rook, queen c7, b3. And you know, it's this case where you are ready to sack the pawn and you just get a full compensation because your bishop can be developed on f4, and you know, there are potential ideas with an attack on the king side, like for example e5, knight g5, yeah, and this you know, h7 square is very, very vulnerable, you know, especially after e5 and you know, this diagonal opens up. We could get the knight involved by playing knight g5 later on, of course. Yeah, you can definitely see that as well. And yeah, it's also important to play e5. Okay, let's go back. So the main move is b5, yeah, and this idea is quite dangerous for black because basically the pawn on c6 is constantly weak. So we could just play knight e5 here. Knight takes, pawn takes, knight d5, takes, knight to c3. And yeah, you can definitely see that there is a lack of development for black. Knight on d5 is under the pressure, plus pawn on b5 is hanging. And I would say that it's almost impossible to hold it as black. I mean, somehow, you know, engine would say that black is doing relatively fine and it's still possible to keep the game going, but you know, from the human perspective, it's extremely dangerous because the bishop on d5 is essentially, you know, covering like the you know, the f7 square, like the whole king side, and yeah, very dangerous for black. Just queen e4, bishop c5, bishop c6 check. You could trade up the bishops, queen e8, and just get the pawn. So yeah, white is better. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so it was move knight bd7. Now let's take a look at the move c6. So if black plays c6, a very strong response for white is knight e5. So of course the point is that we want to take the pawn back on c4, and black doesn't have b5, so black has to play bishop b4. So actually this line is very, very interesting. We play bishop d2 here, and there are two moves candidates for black. So black could either, get the bishop back, bishop e7, which is the main move, or there is big queen d4. So yeah, this is very, very dangerous for black, but you know, it a little reminds me of the note bomb. I have another course on, and you know, there's this Marshall gambit where black chooses quite a similar idea, but it works actually way better in note bomb than here. So queen d4, we take on b4, queen e5, knight a3, and of course the idea is that we want to capture on c4 and get our knight on d6, and the position gets completely winning for white. So black has to play b5. That's the only move. Now bishop d6, queen to b2. Yeah, and actually notice that black is 3 pawns up. That's quite a lot, to be honest. But you know, those bishops, this knight on a3 gives white full compensation. So sure, castle. Black has to play knight d5. It's the only move. Pawn to e4, knight c3, queen h5. Yeah, maybe not the most tempting move to play, but yeah, actually the idea is that at some point we want to connect our rooks, and at the same time we can create ideas like queen g5, yeah? And after playing queen g5, his pawn on g7 hangs, and the rook, or there is also this checkmate on e7, yeah? So pawn to h6, preventing queen g5, pawn to e5, queen e2. I mean, black would be very happy to trade up the queens, yeah, because if you're materially up, exchanging the queens help drastically, right? So, of course, we should avoid it. Bishop f3, queen to d3, queen to g4, rook to g8. Black has to awkwardly use the rook, yeah, because there is no other way to guard the pawn. Rook a c1, pawn to a6, and there is this nice sacrifice of the exchange. Yeah, so you would ask, why should we necessarily sack the exchange? And actually the point is that this knight was covering the d1 square, and by getting rid of this knight, you create a lot like more interesting ideas. So for example, queen f4 here, and actually the point is that you want to play either knight b1 or rook d1, like Jenkins shows, yeah. And but you know, for example, if knight d7, just bishop c6, rook a7, and queen h4. So yeah, there was a game, ICCF email game, and white easily won, yeah, because the advantage is just significant. And you know, from the human perspective, it's, I would say, almost impossible to protect this black. Yeah, let's go back. So it was this move queen d4, which yeah, which is too dangerous for black. I don't think you would face it, but you know, just in case, repeat some of the lines, and yeah, you're gonna win for sure. So there is also bishop e7, yeah, and after bishop e7, you should just protect your d4 pawn by playing e3. Black has two moves candidates. They could either play b5 or castle short side. So if they castle short side, we just recapture the pawn, and yeah, actually the position is very, very pleasant for white. We have a strong d4 pawn. The bishop on g2 is just opened. Our minor pieces are developed. So for example, b6, short castle, bishop b7. If black plays a bishop a6, you can just play b3 and you're fine. Yeah, so bishop b7 and pawn b4. Yeah, this idea is also very nice. Like, what do you think of the point of it? Think for a sec. So the point is that we want to prevent c5 potentially, right? And it's not only about c5, it's about getting this space. And you know, the space, it basically helps white to organize a very nice setup, which would significantly help you to have nice play in the middle game. Yeah. So knight bd7, and the white's queen would stay very nice on b3. Yeah, because then c1 square is liberated for the rook. You could develop your knight to c3 probably, And of course, another plan would be to play maybe a4, a5. Okay. Let's go back a little. If black plays b5 here, that's sort of like the main move. Then we have very interesting variation where black is sacrificing the exchange. So it's knight c6, bishop captures, bishop to d7, bishop a8, queen e8, pawn to f3. Yeah, so I mean, the point of the sacrifice for black is to basically get this interesting play along the light squares, along this diagonal a1, a8, h1, trying to increase the pressure on the f3 pawn, use that white doesn't have this light square bishop anymore. So pawn to e5. Yeah, this is the best move. Black wants to activate their pieces as fast as possible. So we just castle, we completely ignore it. Yeah, because if you would take on e5, there is this move knight g4. And yeah, I'm just not quite sure if we want to see this, because then, there's knight e5, knight d3, and it's very dangerous. So you just play castle. E takes d4, e takes d4, black castle short side, rook to e1. Yeah, that's just a very strong move. We develop our rook with the tempo. Knight d5, just one of the ways to protect the e7 bishop. King to g2. Yeah, this is, it doesn't necessarily mean something for us right now, but, in the long term, this move would be super useful because pawn on f3 is overprotected. So bishop f6, knight to c3, knight to b4, and you can play knight e4 here, simultaneously attacking the knight on b4 and the bishop on f6, trying to ruin black's pawn structure. Knight to d3, knight f6, intermediate check, why not? Gf and bishop h6. So yeah, I would say that the position is super complicated. We are ready to give the exchange back. Yeah, and the point is that you would try to use that your bishop is a little bit stronger than black's. So for instance, knight e1, queen takes, rook e8, queen d2, and also our pawn structure is better. Queen d5, queen f4, rook e2, king f1, queen e6, and just g4. And yeah, I would say that it's still quite unclear what's going on the board, but like overall, I would say that it's easier to play as white.